If you ever move into a new home and the first thing that appears outside your door is a pair of shoes you don't recognize, you should leave before nightfall, because someone might be trying to tell you the last person who lived there didn't get the chance to. Elena and Marco had been searching for a place for months when they found the little third-floor apartment on Boulevard East. It was old but warm, with a view that made the whole place glow at sunset. They signed the lease without hesitation. The first night, they noticed the light in the hallway flickered exactly once every few seconds, steady, rhythmic, almost like breathing. At 2:17 a.m., it went out for a full 10 seconds before returning. They didn't think much of it until the next morning when they woke to find the bathroom cabinet open, items shifted around, and a faint smell of old cologne clinging to the air. They joked that maybe the last tenant had left behind a friendly building ghost. But the superintendent's reaction when Marco mentioned it was too quick, too clipped, a muttered "don't worry about that," paired with a look that didn't reach his eyes. What unnerved them more were the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, measured, walking the hallway outside their apartment after midnight, clearly human, clearly heavy, and always stopping right outside their door. Elena checked more than once to find the hallway empty, but carrying the subtle sway of air that follows someone who has just walked through it. Then came the first note. A pencil sketch slipped under their door. It was their door, unmistakably, drawn in soft gray lines, with a tall, faint silhouette standing behind it, as though looking back at the artist. No message, no name, just the door and the figure. They were unsettled but not terrified. Yet, a few days later, the second note appeared, taped neatly to the door with a strip of white tape. This one read, "You should leave suddenly too." The handwriting slanted downward, as if written on someone's knee or in the dark. They confronted the superintendent, who sighed heavily, rubbing his temples, then finally admitted the previous tenant, Samuel, had not moved out voluntarily. He had simply disappeared, left everything behind except his wallet and, strangely, his shoes, which had been found lined up outside the apartment door exactly how the notes now mimicked. Police had investigated, searched the building, questioned neighbors, and ultimately concluded he must have abandoned the property. But according to the superintendent, the building had developed habits since Samuel vanished. Lights that flickered at the same minute every night. Footsteps when no one was home. Doors that unlocked themselves. 3 nights after the warning note, Marco found a pair of men's loafers outside their apartment. Polished, unfamiliar, size 11, not his, not anyone's they recognized, perfectly aligned, toes pointing toward their door. Elena insisted they must belong to a neighbor, maybe left by mistake, but the hallway camera told a different story. The security footage showed the empty hallway at 1:43 a.m., then a single frame jump, no movement before or after, where the shoes suddenly appeared in the frame. No person, no shadow, just the shoes. The couple decided to pack and leave the next morning. They began boxing up essentials before going out for lunch to calm their nerves. When they returned, the shoes were gone, but something much worse had taken their place. Their own sneakers were now positioned outside the apartment in the same perfect alignment. They had been inside when they left. They always kept them by the kitchen door. Someone had entered the apartment without breaking anything, without leaving a sign, and arranged their shoes in a silent, mocking warning. When they burst inside, everything looked untouched, except for the faint smell of that same cologne from the first night, a scent neither of them owned. They moved out that evening, breaking the lease, abandoning furniture, leaving the keys with a trembling apology. The superintendent didn't argue, he only nodded like he had been waiting for it. Later, they learned other tenants had reported the same flickering hallway lights at 2:17 a.m., the same footsteps, the same slow knocking that never came from a physical hand. Some had even mentioned glimpsing a shape at the end of the hall, tall, still, watching, vanishing the moment they blinked. Boulevard East still rents out that apartment. People move in, then out, always quietly, always suddenly, as if they're afraid the building might notice. And the shoes, those immaculate shoes, still appear outside the door every few months like a ritual, or a warning, or a promise that whoever arranged them is not yet done watching the people who dare to live in that room. You might think living with a quiet roommate is lucky, but silence isn't always shyness. Sometimes it's because the person living above you isn't supposed to be there at all. When Jonathan moved into the small rental near the University of Oklahoma, he was relieved to have an upstairs tenant who seemed to keep to himself. The landlord told him the man's name was Derek, worked night shifts, wasn't much of a talker. Perfect. Jonathan was juggling graduate classes, lab work, and a long-distance relationship. The last thing he needed was a loud, intrusive housemate. For the first week, everything seemed normal. Jonathan would come home late, hear footsteps above him, some light scraping of furniture, the toilet flushing occasionally. Not once did he actually see Derek, but he assumed their schedules just didn't overlap. Then food began disappearing from the fridge, little things at first. A yogurt cup, half a sandwich, a bottle of soda. Jonathan chalked it up to forgetfulness until a full grocery bag he'd brought home vanished overnight. He knocked on Derek's door the next morning, but no one answered. The room was silent. The landlord insisted Derek was a night owl, probably asleep. Jonathan left it alone. Then the noises changed. They became slower, heavier. Not the pacing of someone simply walking to the kitchen, but the deliberate steps of someone creeping, as though trying not to be heard. At 2:30 a.m. one night, he heard the upstairs floor groan under weight, followed by a dragging sound, then a long pause. Jonathan called out, "Derek, everything okay up there?" No answer. He waited. A few minutes later, the sound of someone descending the stairs. Careful, steady footfalls stopped just outside his kitchen door. Not a sound afterward. When he finally mustered the courage to check, the stairwell was empty, as if whoever had been standing there had evaporated. The light bulb above the stairs flickered, casting shadows that stretched into strange angles, but the house was silent. Jonathan tried to ignore the feeling that someone had been watching him from the dark. The breaking point came 2 weeks later when he glimpsed movement at the top of the stairs, a silhouette, tall and thin, standing perfectly still, watching. But the moment the hallway light flickered back on, the shape vanished. Jonathan called the landlord again, more persistent this time. Reluctantly, the landlord admitted he hadn't seen Derek in months. He assumed Derek was sleeping at odd hours. "Maybe he's staying with a girlfriend," the landlord offered weakly. But Jonathan, shaken, insisted something was off. The landlord agreed to search the house. The upstairs room was empty. Not tidy, empty, vacant, no clothes. No toiletries, no bed sheets, no signs of life, just dust, stale air, and a faint imprint in the carpet suggesting furniture had once been there. When they checked the crawl space behind the closet, though, they found blankets, food containers, a makeshift pillow, and pages torn from notebooks. Covered in handwriting. The same sentence copied repeatedly. "I live here, I live here, I live here." And worse, pages where someone had been practicing Jonathan's signature. Slowly, methodically, over and over, the landlord went pale. After a heavy silence, he confessed something he should have told Jonathan earlier. Derek had died 4 months before Jonathan moved in. A car accident on the interstate. The landlord hadn't updated the listing yet, still feeling guilty, still processing the idea of renting out a dead man's room. He assumed Jonathan would freak out if he knew, so he called the person who'd taken. If you ever see someone sitting in your backseat only in the rearview mirror, don't turn around. By the time you do, they'll already be gone, or they'll finally let you see them. Mara had been driving the lonely Oregon highway since she was 17, returning from late shifts at the diner where she worked to save up for community college. The road twisted through trees so thick the headlights barely penetrated the darkness. Fog clung to everything, soft, silent, suffocating. Drivers often said the fog played tricks on you, but Mara never believed it until the night she felt a faint brushing against the back of her seat, like fingertips barely grazing the fabric. She glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. A girl, thin, pale, maybe 10 years old, sat in the middle of the back seat, staring straight ahead. Mara whipped around, pulse pounding, but the back seat was empty. When she looked at the mirror again, the girl was gone. The next night, Mara told herself it was stress, exhaustion, imagination. But as she drove past the bend near mile marker 42, she saw the same girl on the roadside standing barefoot, wearing a pale dress, staring blankly into the trees. Mara's breath caught in her throat. When she blinked, the girl was gone. The following morning, a cloudy smudge appeared on the car's rear windshield. It looked like a handprint small, the size of a child's. Mara tried to wipe it off. It didn't budge. She drove with her roommate, Lily, a few days later. About halfway home, Lily fell silent. Her face went white. She whispered, "Who's the little girl sitting behind you?" Mara slammed the brakes. The road behind them was empty. But when Mara examined the seat after they reached home, there was an indentation, faint but real, as if someone very light had been sitting there. That night, Mara dreamed of the girl. She stood beside the bed, hair damp, eyes hollow, whispering, "Take me home." Mara woke shaking, but the whisper lingered in her ears for minutes afterward. Over the next week, the sightings intensified. The girl appeared more often in the rearview mirror, sometimes turning her head just slightly, as though acknowledging Mara. Sometimes pointing toward the forest, sometimes mouthing silently.